When you get to Vayikra, it seems to kind of fall flat. People are really into following the Parsha and studying. And then you get to the third book, which we started a week ago, and people get like really falls flat. People don't relate, find it very difficult, find it abstract and historical and not relevant. So I've made it my mission tonight to rehabilitate the book of Vayikra and make Leviticus, I don't want to say great again, because that's, first of all, would show political affiliation and also would imply that it wasn't. It's always been great. We just don't realize it. But that's definitely make Leviticus be rehabilitated and see the richness and the importance and the relevance of this third book of the Torah. The English name, so to speak, Leviticus, is descriptive of the content. In Hebrew, we call it Vayikra. Vayikra is a call. Vayikra is Hashem calling out. And it's not just Vayikra el Moshe, God talking, calling out to Moshe. It's actually a call to every one of us. And to tell us that we must have that Eish Tamid to Kadla Mizbeach. We must have that eternal flame burning on our altar. We've got to have our own personal altar, which we offer our own personal sacrifice, and it must be done with enthusiasm. An Eish, a fire, must be Tamid. It must be a constant fire, and we've got to take the words of Vayikra and the teachings of Vayikra and make them relevant. God's calling to us and giving us that mission and that task. So I'm going to rehabilitate Leviticus by sharing with you a verse from the prophet Hosea. And Hosea says the following, and it's this one here. Yeah, that's it. Hosea says, take words with you, return to God. Imru elav kol tisavon, say to him, forgive all guilt, bekach tov, and take good. But here's the relevant section of the verse, unshalma parim svatenu, and let us pay parim, bulls, with our lips. So in our translation here, instead of bulls, we will pay the offering of our lips. And Hosea, in this prophecy, is kind of telling us about Teshuvah, about going back to Hashem, about asking Him to forgive us, about taking Tov with us. So we'll see what Tov is in a moment. And instead of bulls, we're going to pay the off of our lips. So instead of sacrifices, we're going to do this with our lips. That is what sacrifices did when there was a temple, and at that point, sacrifices, offerings, were a very central, very, very, very important part of temple service. We're going to do that, with the offering of our lips. We're going to use our lips, power of speech here. Take words with you, and we're going to use those to ask Hashem to do to us what sacrifices would otherwise do. There is an amazing medrash, and it's actually completely out of context. It's here in the book of Bamidbar, 18th chapter. And the way it fits there is because it's a chapter in Medrash Rabbah that deals with gematria, with numerical values. But it interprets this verse in a way that's very relevant and very important to us in our context. So what does the verse say? We just read it, right? That's the pasuk here from Hosea chapter 14. It's the third verse. Forgive all guilt, it's good that we pay with the words of our lips. What is tov? What does the word tov mean? So the Medrash says, the Jews say to Hashem, temple times we had sacrifices were cleansed. Now all we have is prayer. Now tov, that word tov, if you look at the, where's tov? Here, tov, tet, Vav Bet, that's 9, 6, and 2, gives you 17. And 17 is the Amidah. There's 19 blessings. We call it Shmoneh Esrei because it used to have 18, and then a 19th blessing was added. But it seems from this medrash that initially there were only 17 blessings to the Amidah. That's Tov. And then there was an additional bracha, which was added when the kingdom of David was challenged. And that's when they added bracha number, I forget which one, Et Tzemach David Avdecha Be'et Tatzmiach. And then at a later stage, when they were battling with what they call malfeasors, we're actually talking about various sects that rejected the oral law and were a threat to the practice of our faith, they then put in the bracha, V'la malshinim al tikva. So then brought it to 19. So it seems that the Amidah was initially 17, and the gematria of Tov is 17. So when it says, take good and pay with the words of our lips, it's actually talking about our Amid, it's talking about prayer. So davening, says the Medrash, takes the place of prayer. And when we say, Shama parim sfatenu, that we're going to pay the offering of our lips, we're talking about davening. Then the Medrash continues. Rav Shimon says, take Tov, and I'm going to find you a different gematria. I'm going to show you how Tov is actually the gematria of Nefesh by using the Atbash system. Now, Atbash means that you don't count an Aleph as one, but you count it as 400. You reverse the letters with the first and the last in the alphabet, and then Beit becomes Shin. So instead of counting Beit for 2, you start counting Beit as 300 for Shin. And that's how the entire alphabet is kind of flipped, matching letters based on how close they are to the center of the alphabet. I guess that would work, right? Because the center letter remained where it is, and then you kind of match the two adjoining letters and you flip them and so forth until you get to the first and the last one. You end up with Tov being the Nefesh. It's a similar idea. At the time that the temple existed, we would incinerate the fats in the innards and be cleansed. Now, behold, our fat, our blood, and our souls made be your will, that it be atonement for us, and that we pay with the words of our lips. So by speaking, by talking, we fulfill that which sacrifices used to fulfill. We translate the word korban very poorly, because we normally say korban is a sacrifice. But it's much more than that. When we delve deeper, a korban, and you'll see how all of these work very well when we're talking about prayer and study. A korban is also from the word karov, close. So it's bringing us close to Hashem. That's the korban. It's also from the word karav, which means war, battle. As in Psalm 59, is it? 56, Pada b'shalom nafshi mikravli, redeem my soul from the battle, from the war. We're forever fighting a soul within us, because we've got two souls that are fighting for control. We've got the animal soul within us, nefesh habehemit, but we've got the divine soul, and we want the divine soul to win the battle over the animal soul, and the korban helps us to do that. And then one I had never heard before, okay, rikavon is the same letters as korban. Was rikavon any Hebrew fluent speakers here? Do we have anybody from Israel on at the moment? Rikavon is rot. What's the concept of rot? Rot is self-abnegation, bitul, putting yourself down. You kind of want to rot away the physical to get to the core of who you really are. So korban is not just a physical act of taking an animal and bringing it on the altar, which is something we cannot do because we don't have the framework to do. We don't have a temple, we don't have an altar, we don't have a kohanim, we don't have purity. I mean, there's so many impediments to actually fulfilling sacrifices that we could not do that. But the concept of the korban being that which brings us close to Hashem, that which is, helps us to fight the war against the forces that want to pull us away, and that helps us rot ourselves away, because the less physical we are, the more open we become to the spiritual and to closeness with Hashem. So all these interpretations really feed one into the other. So how do we do this? Paying the lip service in two ways. And we're going to do both tonight. Way number one, by studying about the sacrifices. And so the Gemara says, if you learn about the Olah, you're going to it will be considered as if you brought the Olah. If you learn the laws of the Shlamim, it'll be considered as if you offered a Shlamim sacrifice and so forth. So it's beyond the realm of a 30-minute shiur to go into depth, but I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of animal sacrifices as they happen. Well, not just animal sacrifices as they happened in the temple, and then from there, in doing so, we'll be offering sacrifices. So let's spend a few minutes describing the sacrifices that exist. So two categories. Something called the korban tzibur, something called the korban yachid. Yachid is an individual, tzibur is a community. Some sacrifices are offered on behalf of the entire Jewish community. For example, the daily offerings, the morning offering, the afternoon offering, Tamid Shel Shachrat, Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim, those are offered on behalf of the entire community. All the Musaf offerings, the additional offerings that were on special occasions like Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, those are communal offerings. Occasionally, a communal offering will be even a sin offering. For example, if a sin was committed not by an individual, but by an incorrect ruling of the Sanhedrin, so that involves the entire community, the Sanhedrin brings the korban tzibur as a sin offering on behalf of the entire community as a whole. So we distinguish the individual sacrifices that person brings and the korban tzibur. You may recall was about 3 weeks ago when we had the shiur on the half shekels that were used to purchase those korbanot tzibur because they had to be bought with community money. There were. Then another distinction is we have what we call kodashim kalim and kodshe kodashim. The most holy sacrifices and those that are not as consecrated. They're also very holy, even those that are not consecrated. It really refers to where in the temple they were offered and where they could be consumed. So kodshe kadashim were sacrifices, animals that were brought, and they were slaughtered in the courtyard right next to the altar, and they could only be consumed within the confines of that courtyard. So the Kohanim, when people went home and they could sit down finally and relax a bit after a long day's service, would be able to roast that meat and consume it in the confines. They couldn't take it home for their families. Kodashim Kalim were of a lesser sanctity, and those could be eaten anywhere in Jerusalem. They did not have to be eaten within the temple compound. So the Kohen could actually bring it home and share that, with his family. So that's the distinction between Kodshe Kodashim and Kodashim Kalim. And then let me just spend a few moments discussing the various types of sacrifices. And I want to make this point, particularly for those who are a bit horrified at the idea of so much slaughter. And the only offering that was not eaten was the Olah. It's called the burnt offering. And the Olah was brought and was completely burnt on the altar, all of it. So the little goat that was brought, or the sheep that was brought morning and evening, the tamid, that was an olah, and that was brought into the altar and burned in its entirety. Everything else here, all the other three categories of sacrifices, there are consumed by the Kohanim, and very often also by the donors, the people who brought it into the temple. So the chatat is a sin offering, and that's for sins. It's a bit technical, because it's also very similar to the asham, which is a guilt offering, and these two kind of are very similar. They're brought as a result of a sin that has been committed. So with the chatat, we have two kinds of chatat. We have the one sin offering that is fixed, and we're told exactly which kind of offering, which animal has to be brought to Hashem. And we also have something called Olei Veyored. That's the what they call it in the taxes, the progressive scale, depending on the person's finances. It would go anywhere from a bull which had to be offered, which obviously not everyone can afford, going down to a sheep or a goat. If that's inaffordable, then you could bring a bird, and if you couldn't even afford that, then you could bring a flower offering. But obviously there were criteria for what your financial standing was in each case. So we have two kinds of chatat. One's called chatat kvu'ah, or fixed chatat, and the other one's called oleh veyored. Oleh goes up or goes down, depending on the person's status. Guilt offerings are brought under certain circumstances. A Nazir, for example, at the end of his period of Nazirut, when he is cleansing himself, brings an asham. Why guilt offering? Well, because vowing is considered to be something that is, and that's so we make him bring a guilt offering. So there are various circumstances where an asham is brought. There also what's called an asham talui, or provisional asham. This is where a person has committed a sin that may have incurred a chatat, the sin offering, but he's not sure. For example, there were, two dishes in the fridge. One was kosher, the other one was not, and was intended actually to be given away to the staff. But the husband comes home and he opens the fridge and sees the dish there, and he consumes it for lunch. In the meantime, the maid comes in and she says, "Oh, madam said there's food for me in the fridge." She says, "Well, it must be that dish there." Then the wife comes home and she says, wait these two dishes. There was that one and this one. And husband says, well, one was for me, one was for the maid. She says, yes, indeed, but that one wasn't kosher. But you'll never know. You'll never know which one you ate, because they're now both gone. So you have what's called the provisional asham offering. And then totally different category is the shlamim offering, or the peace offering. Well, why it's called that? Because everyone's happy there, because the shlamim is divided between the Almighty Rav, the Kohen, and the person who offered the sacrifice. It's divided three ways. So that brings shalom, peace between everybody, and it's called a peace offering. Under those circumstances, you would bring one or the other. Shlamim is a peace offering that would be brought as a todah. If a person wants to show thanksgiving to Hashem for the circumstances today with bench gomel, for somebody who's come out of prison or traveled overseas or through a desert, who recovered from a serious illness. So today you would just get up in shul and bench gomel, and custom is also to do a meal, like sponsor a bracha, or invite people to your home for a su'udat hoda'ah, or a meal of thanksgiving. But in temple days, shlamim offering was brought. Interesting. It's quite a substantial offering, because besides the animal that was brought, it also came with dozens of loaves of bread, and it had a midnight deadline. So it means that basically, unless you wanted to get rid of a lot of meat and waste it, you'd invite a lot of people to your home to join, which is, obviously it means that you're going to bring in quite a few people to celebrate your Thanksgiving meal with you. So we spent a few minutes learning to get laws of sacrifices, and obviously we'll go into much more detail in that. At the beginning of the Siddur, that's the part that most shuls in South Africa skip, there is mention of the various sacrifices, where they're brought. Just before Rabbi Ishmael and there's a full listing of those sacrifices, and it's important to learn that because that is fulfilling the mitzvah of sacrifices. I want to share with you this fascinating Gemara in Ketubot. Gemara Ketubot says that the Mizbeach actually stands for the following four words. Okay, Meziach, Mezin, that's the Mem and Zion, Mechabev, that's the Beit and the Chet, Mechaper. So that word actually is kind of a contraction of those four words. Okay, so Meziach, it moves, Mezin sustains, it endears, that's mechavev, and mechaper, it atones. So there we have it. Mizbeach has a mem and zion for the first two qualities, beit from mechavev and kaf from mechaper. Says the Gemara, this quality, the altar atones, isn't that the same as that quality that it moves sins? While they listed separately, the Talmud says the altar removes evil decrees and atones for sins. So here we have the four categories, and really Chatat Hashem, they're both sin offerings. And how does that work? Well, we have the shlamim, which is what everyone eats from it. So that is the meizin, that's the offering that offers us sustenance. We have the chatat and asham, which are mechaper, which are atonement, and then the last one, olah, which is mechavev. A person will offer an olah to achieve closeness with Hashem. So here you have the categories, which is really four. There are three, as we had them before. So that's the one aspect of studying about sacrifices. We offer them through via study. And then we have the other aspect, the other dimension of paying lip service, and that is prayer, davening. And in many ways, the prayer that we do from our Siddur parallels the sacrifices. So we have three services a day, Shachrit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, and those correspond to the morning offering, the afternoon offering. There was a Tamid, perpetual offering that was brought every morning and every afternoon, and then we have Ma'ariv, which corresponds to the fats and the limbs that were burnt on the altar, which were burnt in the course of the night. So those are the timings actually for these services. Talmud in Brachot discusses what's the appropriate time for Shacharit, and it parallels the appropriate time for the morning offering. What's the correct time for Mincha? And there again, it's exactly the time that the afternoon daily offering in the temple was brought, beginning time and end time. We also have an extra sacrifice on special days like Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, festivals. It's called additional, which in Hebrew is Musaf. And of course, we have the Musaf Amid in Shul. But I want to take it to a further level, because the Shulchan Aruch derives very specific halachot, laws, that are derived from laws of sacrifices and apply to our Amidah. So let me just pull up for you the text of Orach Chaim, chapter, I think it's 98. Just get rid of that now. Sorry about that. So there we are. Shulchan Aruch, chapter 98. So the prayer, the Amidah, is in place of a sacrifice, and therefore one must be careful they resemble the sacrifice with respect to intention, and not let another thought mix in. Oh, this is a very tall order. You're davening, you must concentrate and be fully focused on the davening. We'll actually read in this week's parasha in Tzav about thoughts that come to you during your prayer, during your sacrifices. If you have in mind while offering the sacrifice, you have, unrelated thoughts that can nullify your offering. If, for example, you're offering we talked about the Todah offering, and you say, well, here we are, we're going to have some of it tonight and some of it tomorrow. So that is a big problem because you're only allowed to eat it on the first day. And having thoughts about incorrect handling of a sacrifice is renders it invalid, and in a sense, having improper thoughts during the middle, like what's going to be for lunch today, what's going to be for dinner tonight, or other types of thoughts are inappropriate, and kind of make a prayer incorrect. It's the Amida prayer. It must be said standing, just like the service in the temple had to be said standing. Furthermore, there were specific places in the temple where different offerings were brought. There was a place to store it. There was a place to, receive the blood, to sprinkle the blood, where it was skinned and cut up and so forth. There were specific places. And from here we have the injunction to have a specific place in shul. When you come into shul, you daven in a fixed seat that you've assigned for yourself. If you come into shul late and somebody else is in your seat, that doesn't take precedence. So you may not kick him out and say, well, no, there's a law, I must daven in my place. You must just know you must come to shul, in good time, in future. Then we also have a rule that there may be no interruptions, nothing separating between, for example, a vessel that contains either blood or other parts, animal parts. Even the Kohanim, when they walk around, must be barefoot. There may be nothing separating between their bodies and the floor of the Holy Temple. When they sprinkle blood onto the altar, it must be directly onto the altar. There must be nothing separating. And we also have the practice that we face a wall when we daven, and there shouldn't be anything in between us and the wall. So there's not enough wall for everyone in shul, but you definitely shouldn't daven kind of in the middle of the aisle. I would make a point of first of all, having a fixed place. There are people who have lots of fixed places because they spend 5 minutes talking to this one there, then they go across to the next section, and they spend another couple of minutes talking to the next one, and so forth, and move around. So you have to have a fixed prayer, and it should be, if not by wall, at least, with a pew and a place to keep your sitter in between you and not davening in the middle of nowhere. And then the final point Shulchan Aruch makes, also deriving from sacrifices, is to have special nice garments for prayer. It's to get dressed, get dressed up somewhat. Sometimes people come into shul or daven at home in a very casual way. So I'm not sure why Shulchan Aruch singles out pants for the sake of cleanliness of all the garments. But definitely one should be dressed appropriately when davening. Here you have two ways in which our lips take the place of sacrifices, and why it's exciting to learn from the book of Vayikra, because it's practical, it's relevant, and we learn so many things that affect how we serve Hashem. First of all, the study itself is considered to be a form of worship, of sacrifices, and secondly, so much of the other way, the main way in which we kind of offer sacrifices today, through mid the prayer, and so much of that is derived from laws that relate to the holy sacrifices. So I hope I have raised up Vayikra again, and you can start reading it and learning it with more excitement and more enthusiasm. And I wish you a very good night.
Thank you.